Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Building a Financially Stable Nonprofit. I'm Nick Centineo, Senior Investment Consultant with Manning & Peers Endowment Foundation Service Team, and I'm very pleased to be your moderator for today. I think we have a real treat for you today. I think when we decided we wanted to do a topic on financial stability, we knew right away who we wanted to turn to. I've gotten to know our presenter over the last year or so, and she's truly a font of knowledge, very experienced in this area, which is actually a focus of her firm, Finstead Advisors. And so I'm very pleased to welcome Allison Finstead as our guest today. Hi, Allison.
Hi, Nick. Thanks so much for allowing me to be here. I'm really excited.
Great. A little bit of background on Allison. She has more than 20 years of nonprofit experience, playing integral mission advancement roles in local and international nonprofits. Allison has a master's in public administration, including a concentration in nonprofit management, and a bachelor's from the University of Rochester, with a certificate in marketing from the Simon School of Business. She's been recognized with awards in academic excellence and public speaking, and has earned the Certified Fundraising Executive designation. Allison is a past executive board member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals in the Genesee Valley chapter, and is a longtime supporter and advocate within organizations that help refugees. So Allison, thank you again and welcome. I think today's topic is both timely and a little bit timeless, maybe, in the nonprofit space. All of you in our audience are not alone if you worry about funding. For most organizations, it's a bit of a balancing act, right? So providing for near-term needs alongside saving and planning for the long term. But the best starting point is probably to have a plan, right? And being strategic about your approach. And so today we wanted to teach you the steps to take to develop that plan and answer your most pressing questions about financial sustainability. So Allison will talk about these 5 things: how to strengthen your organization's foundational components, how to implement a culture of philanthropy, how to design a foolproof fund development plan to raise money, how to identify prospective donors for major and planned gifts, and more. And so just a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them throughout the webinar using Zoom's question box. When we conclude today's prepared questions, we'll spend any remaining time answering questions that have been submitted. If we do run short on time and are unable to answer your questions, we will personally follow up with you after the webinar. And for your convenience, a recording of this webinar will also be available for replay. This presentation is also available for CFRE continuing education credit. And so more information will be given about that at the end of the webinar. And that's about it. And so I look forward to learning more about this topic. I think you all do too. So I think we're ready to get started. So Allison, I think a good starting question to sort of form a baseline for today: what do we mean when we talk about an organization being financially sustainable? What does that mean to you?
Sure, that's a great question, and I'm really glad you asked, because it's about more than just fundraising. And with the organizations, my clients that I work with, oftentimes I have to help them create foundations and procedures and protocols that support their fundraising. So a financially sustainable nonprofit knows how much it costs to carry out the programs to advance their mission. They can raise enough to cover those costs from a diverse set of revenue sources, and they have some savings, ideally an endowment, to sustain itself over the long term, perpetuating its ability to fulfill its mission. Now, there are some cases in which we may not actually want a nonprofit to be sustainable, which is maybe not what you'd normally think about. But if you imagine an organization that was created to, say, eradicate a disease, when that organization accomplishes that mission, we would want them to close their doors and celebrate that their mission was accomplished. And really, there are not enough organizations actually closing their doors and celebrating mission accomplished. But so many organizations do great work for in perpetuity. They exist to improve quality of life. For instance, places that exists to help people who are elderly, places of worship, schools, libraries. They're all here to improve our quality of life, and we do want them to become sustainable over the long run.
Yeah, so where do you suggest starting? I guess where do you suggest starting the sort of the process and the planning process of becoming sustainable?
Well, I ask nonprofits to think of their nonprofit as building a house. So when you go to build a house, the first thing you want to do is pour some type of concrete foundation, which is, in this case, is the board of directors. And having the right board of directors, the right people with the right skill sets in the right seats is so important. That is really what strengthens your house. And if the board is underperforming, the organization will also underperform just about 100% of the time. And organizations that have a struggling board, maybe the board may be struggling because they actually were not given realistic expectations. And so when organizations are recruiting their board members, they need to be very honest and upfront about, are we a working board or a development board? Are we going to be rolling up our sleeves? How many hours is this actually going to take? And board members need to also realize that they have a legal and financial responsibility for the organization, and they need to take their roles very seriously. So pouring that concrete foundation, making sure the board of directors is functioning really well is absolutely a critical component to becoming sustainable. Then going back to the house analogy, think of the first floor as the strategic plan. And strategic plans need to be very hardworking documents that we revisit over and over, the same way our first floor in our house is very hardworking. We spend a lot of time there. A strategic plan should not be created once and kept on the shelf, but revisited maybe every month or every quarter whenever there are board meetings. And really what a strategic plan is supposed to do is to help organizations figure out how to allocate their scarce resources of money, energy, and time on a day-to-day basis. So looking out 3 to 5 years into the future, what are the goals that we are casting as an organization? Where are we going? And the reason, from a fundraising point of view, that strategic planning is so important is if I were to sit with a donor and I didn't have a strategic plan, what would I ask the donor for? Money to keep the lights on, to keep us going? That's hardly compelling. And so the strategic plan is so critical, because with a strategic plan, I can say to a donor something like, we'd like you to come alongside us in giving underprivileged youth the opportunity to play sports, providing teamwork, camaraderie, mentorship, and purpose, ultimately decreasing gun-related violence in our city by 30%. Imagine casting a vision to a donor like that. That would be so much more compelling. And you need to have a strategic plan to get to that point. And then going back to the house analogy, foundation is the board, first floor is the strategic plan, and second floor is the fundraising plan. And now every nonprofit wants money like yesterday, right? Like they want money months ago, years ago, but trying to raise money first without the board being properly developed and the strategic plan is like trying to build a house from the roof down. It doesn't work. And so we highly recommend doing the development plan after these other things have been created. And then you may ask, what is the house actually made of? And it's made of the programs and services. So every beam, every stud, every nail needs to be the high quality programs and services that the organization offers that are desired by the community.
Love the analogy. And so having a healthy fundraising program is clearly important for most organizations. And it's the second floor, as you pointed out. So again, sort of from a high level, and maybe zeroing in on fundraising specifically, how do you recommend implementing a plan for development that is sustainable?
There are a lot of things that I recommend that go into a development plan. And really, this is a very comprehensive development plan. It's not just how are we going to raise the money this year, but when I put a development plan together for an agency, I really want it to include all the different components that go into giving that organization a sustainable financial framework. So I'm going to go through these. If you see on your screen here where it says key takeaways, I'm going to go through those briefly with you, but I will tell you that at the end of the presentation, there's going to be a URL that will give you, I created it specifically for the attendees of this group. And it's a secret page. It's just for you. And it will have examples, templates, resources, white papers, articles for all of these things. You can just, it's all free. You can take everything from it that you need. So that, and the slides from this presentation will be available there also. So don't worry about taking notes frantically here. But so when we're doing the comprehensive development plan, the first thing I recommend is having an agency budget, income and expenses, really basic. But if we don't know that, we don't know how much we need to raise, so we need to start there. Gift acceptance policy. This is something that you create once and probably don't have to revisit too often. Now that agencies are going to crypto, I'm finding that gift acceptance policies are needing to be updated. But a gift acceptance policy just says, what kinds of gifts is your organization willing to accept? Now, I've been in this field since before cell phones were a thing, like a long time, and started in college. And I have never seen a donor offer to an organization that I worked for like a weird gift, but I've heard of all kinds of things, like offering boats and horses and antiques and just stuff that a donor may want to like be rid of so they don't have to worry about it and then they can get a tax refund for it. But imagine what position that might put your organization in if they offered you a horse. Like, how do you accept it, maintain it, store it, repair the boat, whatever. It can really put the organization in a tough spot. And you don't necessarily want to say no, you don't want to have an awkward conversation with the donor. And this is where a gift acceptance policy comes in handy. Ahead of time, you outline, these are the things we are willing to take, these are the things we're not willing to take. And in that way, if a donor offers you their yacht, I don't know, you may be able to say, we actually don't accept yachts, but we would love a contribution to stock or something simpler like that. So it just makes the conversation a lot easier. So definitely gift acceptance policy, and you can find free templates all over the place online. It's very simple to put together. Gift acknowledgement process / stewardship flowchart. The purpose of this is when a donor makes a gift to your organization, who writes the letter? Who makes the phone call? Do you follow up with an email? Do you follow up with a text? And different donors of different gift sizes may require different reactions. And so having everything laid out in a flow chart makes things really easy so everybody knows what they're supposed to do. So if a gift of $500 comes in, they get this email, this letter, this person makes a phone call, so on and so forth. So check online later and you'll see examples of the stewardship flow chart. Donation pyramid is the example you can see on your screen here. These are typically used in capital campaigns. If you've been through a capital campaign, surely you've seen it. But I recommend that organizations, maybe with budgets on the smaller side, like $1 million or less, may want to use these as part of their annual budgeting. So taking a look at the pyramid, it's split into 3 sections. A-level donors on the top, they'll require the most time, attention, energy. B-level donors will require less. C-level donors, you may not even know them. They may have given $50 at an event and you've never met them. And then looking at those gift amounts to the side, if this organization, I'm using a budget here of $100,000 just for a nice even round number. I know it's a very low budget, but just we'll just use that figure for now. So if they know of a donor who can give $50,000, they'll cultivate that donor in hopes of receiving that gift. It's so important because that will be half their operating budget. Then they'll be looking for 2 $10,000 gifts to equal $20,000. And then you go down that column of gift amounts. It doesn't have to work out exactly that way in reality, but it just gives the organization a guide to say, how are we going to raise the money that we need to raise this year? So you can apply this pyramid concept to your operational budget if you choose. A moves management plan is a fantastic tool and very important for your major donors. Basically, what it does is shows how are you going to relate to your donors each month throughout the year. You'll see an example of this template as well, but just to explain it to you briefly, imagine you have 50 top donors, major donors that you want to cultivate. You would have each of their names in a row. And then the columns would say, what part of our agency is this donor most passionate about? Because you may have one agency mission, but many agencies have different parts of their mission that donors may really lock onto, they may really care about. So figuring out what they're most passionate about, how they want to be communicated with, whether it's phone, email, in person. And then every month of the year, January, February, March through December, how are you going to have a touch point with them that is donor centered and it intentionally moves the donor to the next point in their relationship with the agency, including in this spreadsheet several asks. Where are you going to ask the donor to be a contributor? So the moves management plan makes sure there's a place or a plan in place for every major donor. Fundraising and communications calendar. This is where you get your fundraising and your marketing departments together, work on a calendar in sync with one another to make sure that there are not too many events and appeals on one part of the year and leaves the other part of the year with poor cash flow, or that isn't too much PR and social media going on in one part of the year, that the other part of the year is quiet. So making sure these two departments are in sync. Key performance indicators. It is actually amazing to me how many really fantastic nonprofits don't use KPI. And what key performance indicators are any metric that's important to your agency that you want to measure on a quarterly basis. And it's like looking at a snapshot in time, a dashboard of your fundraising. So you may decide that you're going to measure how much has our agency raised year over year and quarter over quarter. And you can slice and dice that data into other segments, like how many churches give, how many businesses give, how many foundations give, or how many people give $25,000 or more, and how many people give between $10,000 and $25,000, and just measure each quarter what all these statistics are, so you get a sense of the overall health of the organization. And aside from just the financial health of the organization, you can also add how many clients has the organization seen, or how many people has it served, and include some client metrics like that, so that you can see how everything relates to everything else and how things change quarter over quarter. It's really a crucial step in making sure that the organization is sustainable. And finally, the case for support. Case for support is also called a case statement. It's typically used in a capital campaign. Basically, it's a forward-looking prospectus, beautifully designed, that you may give to a prospective major donor. But I recommend, if your agency is on the smaller side, to use a case for support, not only for a capital campaign, but for your agency as a whole, or certain projects or programs that your agency has, so that when you are going to sit down face to face with the donor, you have a beautiful document that you can hand them that explains the agency's vision, where it's going, and how they may want to be involved. So I know that was a long mouthful, but there you have it. Those are the ingredients of a comprehensive development plan.
Well, and it seems like there's something here, for every organization, right? For those that are small, for those that are large, like there's something here that can be used across the spectrum.
Yeah, and I should also mention, now that you say that, Nick, that if you do have a smaller organization and this feels like way intimidating and too resource intensive, just even incorporating one of these things into your practices will bring you to the next level. It doesn't have to be all of them at once. Yeah,
no, very good. Now, another good point that I want to touch on is culture, because I think that's sort of important today. If people are working remotely, maybe there's not as much time for culture building at organizations as there has been in the past. So to you, what role does culture play in fostering sustainability? Maybe both on the governing board level or among staff?
That is a fantastic question, and I particularly love it because I was a student at University of Rochester and an anthropology major, so I've always been really interested in cultures. And actually, I give a presentation called "Creating a Culture of Philanthropy" because it's really important. And so I'll distill just a few points of that for you here. But when we talk about creating a culture of philanthropy, it's helpful to know what is the definition of philanthropy. And it's not fundraising, but it's love of humankind. And so when we incorporate this culture of philanthropy into our organization, we're incorporating a love of humankind. And so when we have to apply that to the way that we interact with our donors. We all know of a lot of organizations that have a very transactional relationship with their donors. We need money now, we need money last month, can you please give, and then we forget to follow up and we ask for more. And it's treating donors like ATMs. And ultimately this leads to poor donor retention, meaning they leave, which is very expensive for the organization. the flip side to that is having philanthropic relationships with donors, where the relationships are just steeped in love and care of their donors. They lead to far greater, it's actually far more fun for a fundraiser to have these philanthropic relationships with their donors, because they're more satisfying and the donation naturally comes from those. So focusing on philanthropic relationships. Now, I want to mention that not everybody in an organization needs to ask for money. In fact, that would be terrible if they did. We don't, not even every board member needs to ask for money. In fact, I was talking with a board member just the other day of an organization who felt discouraged and somewhat shamed because she was not willing to ask for money on behalf of the organization. And I said to her, well, what other roles do you play in terms of creating a culture of philanthropy within the organization? Because it's not just about asking for money. And so we talked about other ways that she could be involved in casting a wide net for the organization, bringing people in, getting people interested. So not everybody needs to ask, but there are 3 components that every organization needs to have to make sure that the culture of philanthropy is a healthy one. So the first one is that every role in the organization, whether it's a volunteer role or a staff role, a board role, a temp role, every role needs to understand that it's critical to the vision. And to illustrate this, I'm going to read a quick, like 2-sentence story to you here. You may have heard it before. I don't know if it's true or not, but it illustrates the point. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy visited NASA for the first time. During his tour of the facility, he met a janitor who was carrying a broom down the hallway. The president then casually asked the janitor what he did for NASA, and the janitor replied, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." The janitor knew that his role as a janitor was essential to NASA accomplishing its vision. And that is so important because if everybody is equipped with stories of transformation of what your organization does, and they're treated with love and compassion by the higher ups, their enthusiasm for the organization will naturally ooze out to others. And that really helps put the organization in a good stead when it comes to philanthropy. The second principle for creating a culture of philanthropy is a mental shift for the people inside the organization. You need to realize that you're not just an organization who needs money, but you are helping your donors be the change that they wish to see in the world. So the donors who have a certain passion to do what your organization does, they can't do it without you. They can't feed the homeless without you. They can't rescue animals without you. You are the key to them doing what is so important to them. And I'll tell you a brief story that shows, I believe, why this concept is so important. I used to work for an international NGO, and we did our work overseas in a country that was not amenable to having outside help. And they actually threw out like tens of thousands of nonprofits who were trying to do work there. So if we did go there, we had to go somewhat undercover. And I ended up going to this country, and they denied me entry, deported me, and apparently I'm an enemy of their state with a lifetime ban, which is hilarious because I'm really not threatening to anybody. But I still continue to give to that organization on a monthly basis because what they're doing in that country is the most important thing in the world to me. And I can't do it without them. And so they didn't even have to ask me. I just give all the time because they are the key to the change that I wish to see in the world. And when your organization realizes that, it puts you in a position of strength and enthusiasm and creates a wonderful culture of philanthropy in your place. And so the challenge for you here is to find out why your donors give and demonstrate how your organization meets that need. And then the third part here is your organization considers the donor or the volunteer to be the hero and not the organization itself. And then a quick way to determine whether your organization is considering the volunteers and donors to be the hero is grab your last annual report and take a look at how many times the word we has been mentioned and the word you has been mentioned. And when we're talking to donors about how we as an organization are fantastic and we accomplish all this work and we do such great stuff, it's not really expressing enough appreciation for the fact that without them, you couldn't do it. So everything that you write, every letter, newsletter, appeal, everything needs to say you, we're grateful for you. You're the key to making all this work. And so just taking a look at how you reflect upon your agency and the donor is really important. And also, in terms of that concept, thanking the donors promptly and letting them know how their gift was used was so important. So I'll tell you a quick story. When I worked with this international NGO, there was a man one time who donated $1,000 out of the blue. And we were in the habit of calling every donor to say thanks. And so I called this man and said, thanks for giving. And what made you give? And how can our organization be praying for you? Because it was a faith-based organization. And I thanked him again. That's the 4-part recipe for a great thank you call, by the way, is thank the donor, find out why they gave, ask them how they are, or if you're a faith-based organization, you can ask, how can we pray for you? And then thank them again. And that is written on the website too, but it really leads to beautiful calls. And anyway, so we had a nice conversation. And then a couple of days later, we received another $1,000 gift from him. And so I called him again and said, hey, thanks, you didn't have to do that. And he said, well, you're the only nonprofit who calls and says thanks and not please give again. And so I wanted to give to you. And so really putting the donor in the place, casting them to be the hero really makes a difference.
Wow. Now this is probably a good segue into the next question, because we've talked a lot about relationships here, but because they're so important, what could you give some more stories about what a relationship with donors is typically like an ongoing relationship? Like what is a healthy ongoing relationship like with donors at successful organizations?
Yeah, I actually think I have a little story for this one too, but there's a few things that successful organizations do frequently. One is they get to know their donors. That is just so important. I mean, I think most good organizations, good fundraisers know that they have to get to know their donors. So say say you work for a senior living center and there's a donor named Henry, and his wife, Elena, had stayed in the senior living center for a few years before she died, and she was really taken well care of there. And you've gotten to know Henry well enough to know that one of his values is ethical care of the elderly, and that he had a great experience there with his wife who eventually passed. Knowing that is really good, because not only will that just add to the depth of your relationship with Henry, but when there's a wing of that organization that needs to be renovated, then you can go back to Henry and perhaps if he's one of your top donors, you can even suggest that he name that wing after his wife with a leadership gift. And so having those one-on-one, face-to-face relationships and knowing why people give and what they value is so important. Successful organizations also involve their donors in ways that don't necessarily require funds. For instance, you may decide to ask several of your best volunteers or board members to become ambassadors. Maybe they host some small scale events on behalf of your organization to cast a wider net and draw people in. Maybe some of your best donors you ask to be mentors so they can get to know the clients that you serve and really deepen your relationship with them that way so they can really see the impact of their gift. There's all sorts of ways that you can involve the donors without asking for money, but that really enhances that relationship. And then successful organizations also have approximately 10 touch points between asks. And this is a concept that's actually common in the sales world too. I think in sales, they talk about it being up to 13 touch points between asks of their customers. But in the nonprofit world, we recommend 10 touch points. So a touch point can be anything like a text message to the donor, a phone call, sending out your biweekly newsletter, an annual report, having them attend an event, going to a lunch, anything at all that just touches the donor is considered a touch point. This is different from moves. When we talked about the moves management chart earlier, the moves for your major donors need to be a little bit more intentional about moving the donor from one spot to the next along like a giving trajectory. Touch points are a little bit lighter in nature. Just any way that you can reach the donor is acceptable. And you want about 10 between asks. So whether it's an appeal ask or an event ask or a face-to-face ask, make sure that you're reaching out to them a lot. Successful organizations also not only thank donors, but they report back on the impact of their gift. And this often gets lost in the hustle and bustle, the whirlwind of just the organization trying to do all of its stuff. But taking a moment to create something to let the donor know how their gift was used is really important. So I like to do something for my clients called an impact report. We may send an annual report out like in March. So then the impact report would go out in October, whatever is 6 months before or after the annual report, opposite side of the year. And an impact report is just a brief report saying, this is how your gift has made a difference. And you want it to not only include statistics, but also stories, so that they really understand the impact of their gift. Having thank you plus impact plus a few other touch points means you can ask again. And so I'll share a brief story about thanking and reporting back and how well this worked out for an organization. There was a lady who was a pretty significant donor to an organization, not among the top, but definitely she caught our eye because she was giving on a fairly regular basis. And we invited her to attend the organization's conference and got to know her and just stayed in touch with her. Over the next several months, we found out that her mom passed away, and we sent a card and called her and just checked in, basically treated her the way we would treat a friend. And at the same time, let her know what her last contribution did and kept her abreast of news and events going on with the agency. And then she started saying, she was a small business owner. She started talking about potentially wanting to sell her small business and retire. And maybe she would give some type of gift to the agency out of that, which sounded wonderful, but who knows if that's going to come to fruition. And we knew that she was having trouble selling her business. Well, anyway, time went by and I actually left the organization to start my consultancy. And it was several months after I left that I got a very excited call from my old organization saying that this woman had sold her business, and she gave the organization almost $500,000 from the sale of the business just out of the blue, because we just treated her like a friend, let her know the impact of her gift, kept in touch. It's so simple. So I would say those are the most important things that successful organizations do with their donors.
Yeah, I really like the rules of thumb, especially about the touch points and things like that. Could it be any sort of touch points, anything from like emails to text messages to social media, anything in between?
Yeah, go to their social media page and leave a comment. I mean, there's really anything. The sky's the limit. You can be creative with it.
Yeah. Oh, cool. So going back to the donation pyramid that we had on an earlier slide, I think some in our audience would like to know more about maybe the very top of that pyramid, which are more like I guess I would consider like major or planned gifts, tend to be bigger, because I know that's a focus for many organizations recently. And so I guess the first question is, how do you identify prospects for these major and planned gifts? And then the second question is, how do you then convert them to become major and planned gift donors from prospect to donor? What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely a quandary, but there's ways to find our way through it. Sometimes when I start working with an organization, they say, so do you bring some $1 million donors with you? I say, well, if I did that, then I'd take them with me when I leave. So you don't want me to do that. You got to mind your own database for donors. And donors, major donors, plan giving prospects, they're hiding as the people who give $35 to the last appeal, who give $15 a month. And so there are ways that you can take a close look at your database and figure out who in here could be a major donor. So there are certain things you can do. One of them is if you have some funds, maybe $3,000 is approximately what it costs. You can get a wealth screen, which is a database overlay, and it shows from everybody in your database approximately how wealthy they are. It triangulates publicly available information, like if they're a business owner, if they own a home, if they own a yacht, if they're an SEC insider, what party they vote for. All this information is pulled from different places and put into this report. It's really typically only about 80% correct on any given donor, but it helps you see the outliers. And so if you spend the money, get this wealth screen, find out that you've got a couple very wealthy people in your database that you had no idea, and you work on the donor, on the relationship with them, it could easily pay for the wealth screen and make it well worth your while. So running a wealth screen, they're called Donor Search, WealthX, WealthPoint. There's a bunch of different ones out there. I recommend doing it once every few years, if not regularly. Some people buy these and just constantly run the database through it. So just having that as a tool is helpful. Surveying your donors is also important. Asking them why they chose to give, why they chose your agency, getting to know them better really helps pave the way for a better relationship. And it also helps you know who has really a passion about this agency that we should be pulling a little bit closer to us. Small events. I'm a big fan of small events. Large events like golf tournaments, galas, 5Ks, they can be good and they can have a good impact on your bottom line. But sometimes if you include staff time as a line item in that event's expenses, you may find that actually the event didn't break even. And then there's the opportunity cost of if your staff is working on a golf tournament, are they out cultivating major donors? No, that was a missed opportunity. So sometimes big events are good if they have non-monetary goals, such as we need to let people know about this problem that our society is facing, or we need to find more volunteers, or some non-monetary goal might make a large event like that worthwhile. But I'm really a fan of smaller events. I had mentioned before having identified some ambassadors who could host a little event in their home, at a restaurant. Maybe they invite 10 or 20 friends. The executive director perhaps comes and speaks, or maybe the executive director may already have a video prepared to show these prospective donors. And it's a really nice way, not only fundraising, but friend raising. And that way you get to know these prospects more, just more intimate, it's a more intimate setting, a more intimate environment. Anyway, going back to this list, asking the board who they know, set aside some time at a board meeting and give them a list of all the top people, or everybody if you want, in the database, and have them initial next to who they know and who they may be willing to draw more closely into the organization on the organization's behalf. That's a great way to get to know some people better. And then last and most importantly is getting to know your donors face to face and making time to sit with them and talk with them. These all can move people from being $50 a year donors to $5,000 a year donors to $100,000 a year donors, and eventually to becoming plan givers. And you had also asked, Nick, a little bit about plan givers and finding them in your database.
Yep.
And I'll share a few characteristics that are common to plan givers. One, and this was listed recently in a Giving USA report, that 50% of people who leave organizations in their wills have history of giving to that organization for 20 or more years. And so what you're looking for here is frequency and longevity, not necessarily a lot of money. So if you want somebody to leave the organization in their will, then take a look at who has been giving for years and years and years, any amount of money. Not only givers, but who's been involved. Are there staff members or volunteers or board members who've been around for a long time, regardless of what they've given or not given? They may be actually really good candidates to become plan givers. You don't need to be, contrary to what a lot of folks think, you don't need to be wealthy to leave an organization in your will. In fact, one of the most common wealth markers among people who leave bequests is that they own a home, and the home is somewhere in the mid-value range for your community. So in Rochester, it would be like, I don't know, 200,000, 300,000 or something like that in this area. It does not need to be $1 million home. These people do not need to have huge investments. Just owning a home is a significant marker for a wealth marker for leaving a bequest. And then also take a look at the age of the donors. Even though people do make wills in their 20s and 30s, if they put your organization in their will, you're probably not going to see the fruit of that for a very long time. So just for the sake of your organization, it's better to concentrate on folks who are a little older, maybe in their 60s. Also, people who leave bequests tend to be female. They tend to be single. They may be childless, not necessarily every time, but those are some other markers to look for. But longevity is the most important. And I should also mention that an organization that wants to start a plan giving program needs to have proven itself to have some longevity. So the organization needs to have been around for at least 10 years with measurable impact, with a great vision for the future. It cannot be one of those organizations who intends to close their doors at some point because they've accomplished their mission. It needs to be one where people would feel very comfortable leaving a legacy gift in that individual's memory.
Those are great tips. Yeah, thanks, Allison. I guess related to that, and I mean, you did touch upon this a little bit already, but in endowed giving, I sort of see that as related to plan giving. Allison, in your view, what role does endowed giving specifically play in sustainability for an organization? And then what's your suggestion on how to grow this area of support? Maybe it has a lot of overlap with what you've already said for plan giving, but is there anything unique about endowed giving specifically?
Endowed giving is so helpful because it allows the organization to relax a little bit. It plays a really key role in sustainability. So with an endowment, the organization has received some type of gift. Usually, in the relationship here usually is that they've received a plan gift from an individual. They've decided to invest it in an endowment, and then the interest from the endowment helps offset their operations or some particular project throughout the year. So having an endowment is so helpful to the organization, just knowing that some part of their budget is going to be covered by this year after year. So just out of curiosity, do you have any idea how much Harvard's endowment is?
Put me on the spot, but I think it's,
and you can't Google it on your cell phone, Nick. You have to take a wild guess.
It's big. I mean, with the recent market correction, I'm sure it's a little bit smaller, but I think it was it 40 million, or I mean 40 billion last time at the end of the year?
A little higher.
50?
Just about there. Yeah. The last I heard was that at the end of 2021, Harvard had a $53 billion endowment. So does every organization need a $53 billion endowment? No, there isn't really a good rule of thumb for determining what size an organization's endowment should be. It depends so much on all their unique factors. But what is really important is having a trusted financial advisor and perhaps a trusted lawyer to basically on call, so that if any donor wants to give to that organization to contribute to their endowment, or to even make a planned gift, they have these resources that they can pass along the donor to. So Nick, why don't you talk a little bit about this, since you're at Manning and Napier, and I know you manage some organizational endowments. Do you have any stories of nonprofits who've seen great success and great sustainability because they had an endowment?
Yeah, I'd echo I'd echo some of what you said before, in that, a lot of nonprofits use endowed support to complement other sources of revenue. So maybe their operating revenue, maybe their annual type giving, like mailings. And so this makes sense for a lot of organizations where, again, perpetuity is part of their mission. And endowments definitely can diversify your funding and be a pretty stable source of funding if you manage it that way. So I think that's definitely the pluses that most organizations we work with. That's the purpose that endowed giving plays. Another maybe less appreciated purpose is that it can play a role from the donor perspective too. I think if your mindset is to give donors sort of what they want, right, then endowed giving is a great way to engage people whose main motivation is to leave a legacy. All right, so I see lots of organizations who want to have an option for every type of donor. From people who are not as wealthy to people who are very wealthy and older and well established. And so I think having an endowment as an option, sort of in your toolkit, it definitely fits the bill for that older donor to say, this is what we have available for your motivation, something that motivates you personally. And then of course, it plays sort of the role of, the organization plays sort of the role of shepherding people over time from, starting small to growing something into something bigger in terms of like a legacy or an endowed gift. So to me, that's a great path to take, to start with a donor who's smaller and grow them into a much more committed long-term legacy donor.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it also made me think that I should mention plan giving programs are very easy to start. Endowment campaigns are a different animal. And so they should not be looked at as one and the same. They're related to one another, but they are two different things.
Yeah, great point. I think, and so how do you, maybe this is beyond the scope, but how do you know if you're ready to go into a full-fledged campaign?
An endowment campaign?
Yeah.
There's so many different factors that go into that. And you may actually want, my very first job in fundraising was helping with an endowment campaign, and it was just strictly an endowment campaign. And it was hard. I mean, I'll just be honest, it was hard because people want to give a lot of times to bricks and mortar stuff that they're going to see now. Capital campaigns are a little bit easier. I recommend, if you are having a capital campaign, to have an endowment component where some percentage of each capital gift will end up going to endowment, so that the endowment will grow. But we would have to talk, it would take far longer than this call. We would have to talk at length about endowment campaigns to figure out what are all the things you want to have in place to make sure that it will be successful.
Well, even that just there though is attaching it to a capital campaign, sort of bootstrapping an endowment component onto a capital campaign to build a building or what have you. I think that's a good idea, and I think lots of successful organizations do that too, recognizing that with this asset that you're building, there might be maintenance expenses associated with it, and it's helpful to have an endowment component to that.
Yeah. So looking at these key takeaways on the screen, this actually, Nick did not put me up to this, I promise, but there's this newsletter that I found. Manning and Napier makes this. I got it at a conference recently, and I said, hey, I'm going to be presenting with Manning and Napier. I should probably grab this. And I read through it. And on page 4, building your endowment in 5 steps. That is so timely. And so these key takeaways here, I actually pulled straight from Manning and Napier. Formalize your case for support. We talked a little bit about that earlier. Develop a marketing plan and collateral. Identify potential plan giving partners. Build relationships with those partners, and then commit to stewardship. And it's all right in here. And also, I should also mention that on the URL that I will provide you, maybe on the next slide, maybe in 2 slides, at the very bottom of that resource page is a section on plan giving. There is a white paper I highly recommend by the Veritas Group, and you can just click on it, add your email, they'll email it to you, it's free. And if you are a larger organization, it will describe in great detail how to put together a plan giving program, and it will just answer all of your questions.
That's perfect segue, Allison. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. I just think that this topic is clearly important to a lot of organizations, and I know you've given our listeners some really good takeaways. So first and foremost, thank you.
Sure.
I did want to close. This is the slide that you're talking about. Allison and Benezet Advisors are great resources for nonprofits, and in fact, Allison has been kind enough to create this section of her website. Here's the link. You just go to benezetadvisors.com/sustainability. You can find more helpful resources as a follow-up to today. And of course, I know, Allison, you're always open to having a conversation. That's what we love about you.
Yeah, that's something I'd like to mention actually is something that I work with organizations of all sizes, all types, but I will talk with any organization, regardless of their budget, regardless of what they're going through, and just have like a nice long conversation about what are your pain points and what are some like kind of low-hanging fruit things we could do to put your stuff in order, so that things don't feel so financially overwhelming right now. And it's really just it's like a joy project for me. I just love it so much. And so if you know of organizations that could use some help, but they're like, we can't afford a consultant. No, that's what I'm here for. I'm really just in this because I love what nonprofits do, and the rest just works out.
You can get in touch with Allison at Finstead @benezetadvisors.com. And also please reach out to Manning and Peer. Most of you, as most of you know, we are investment advisors. We manage assets for individual clients, for retirement plans, and for nonprofits. And at the links seen here, you can learn more about our investment strategies and the services that we provide to our clients. You can download our nonprofit magazine. It's called Impact. That's what Allison was holding. Or you can join our mailing list and peruse our library of content that we have devoted to the nonprofit space. We're always trying to put out useful content, both on the investment side and the fundraising side. So please check out manning-napier.com/signup. As a quick reminder, you can submit questions through Zoom's question dialog box, so feel free to do that now. And then as we mentioned before, this presentation is also available for CFRE continuing education credit. And so we'll now be posting in the chat information about how to do that. And great, that's all we had prepared. There are a couple questions that were submitted ahead of time. So Allison, let me throw this first one to you. And we've actually gotten a few questions about going into a little bit more detail about starting a plan giving program. But I guess to best ask it, how do you best organize an effort to include your nonprofit organization in the wills of your members? Is there anything more you can point to in regards to that?
Sure. If it's already been decided, say through board and leadership, that the organization should have a plan giving program, then starting one is extremely simple. You just need to find a financial advisor that you trust. I know that Manning and Napier can do that. You can find other folks if you prefer. It might also be helpful to have a lawyer that you trust, just some people who are willing to take calls from prospective donors, prospective plan giving donors. And then you can just create a pamphlet, flyer. There's a million templates online for this that basically says our organization intends to exist into perpetuity. We would love to have you be part of our legacy. Your legacy would be, important in our organization, and continue your impact by leaving a planned gift of some sort. And then you can list some common ones. Bequests are the most common. There's charitable lead trust, charitable annuity trust. There's all kinds of plan giving vehicles. Some are more complicated than others, and that's where the financial advisor comes in handy. But just a brief flyer that says that just the fact that you can leave a planned gift starts the conversation. And then include some verbiage about the fact that your organization will accept planned gifts in your newsletters, in appeal letters, and annual reports. I've seen it in people's email signatures. Just having that verbiage included in things regularly just plants the seed and reinforces that, yes, this organization will accept a planned gift. And that's really all it takes to get it started.
There's a sub question to that about specific materials to support that effort. So Manning and Peer has a lot of good pass-through materials for donors. Allison, maybe you guys do too. But maybe that's something we can post either on your website or maybe follow up with for those who are interested. If anyone's interested in sample language or sample brochure content, I think we're both happy to help there. Another question: what would you like to see as an organization's minimum endowment, and how would you invest it?
That's a question for you, Nick.
Well, I think you said before that, and I agree, there's really no minimum to an endowment. I think every organization has to determine what is worth the upkeep. So I mean, there's a small cost associated because you have to be able to track and monitor endowed assets, right? It's a separate line item in most financial statements. So there's a little bit of effort to do that, mostly on your accountant's part, but there's a little bit of effort and cost. But I think most people start, or most organizations start with maybe $5,000 or $10,000 as a minimum to have a named endowment fund. established, and I think that's a reasonable amount. But again, every organization will be different there. And as far as how to invest it, it's a big question. I guess I'll start from the high level and say that the main decision that most organizations have to make is the priority. We call them the priority of objectives, investment objectives. And so examples of investment objectives could be capital growth. It could be capital preservation. It could be managing inflation and exceeding the rate of inflation. That's important for an endowment. And so for most endowments that we work with, the priority is number one, to grow. Okay, recognizing that you need to achieve real after inflation growth in order to maintain some equity between the support that you're providing today and the support you're providing into the future. And for most endowments, that's really the main purpose. You have to balance that. But there is an important secondary. Most organizations place a secondary objective on preserving capital, recognizing that there is a need to withdraw assets, the income or the appreciation, in order to fund current programs. So make current grants. You're taking withdrawals from these accounts, and when volatility hits in the market, it becomes more difficult to recover from that if you're taking meaningful withdrawals. And so mitigating that volatility is usually an important secondary consideration. Absent that, you've got a lot of choices. There's individual securities, there's ETFs, there's mutual funds, there's lots of different ways to build a portfolio, but we always suggest on starting with the big picture priorities of those objectives. So I hope that helps. And we've got a few comments here saying very well done, Allison. And I think a few comments about providing the presentation slides and the links.
Yep, it's there.
Yeah, so that's perfect. For everyone, there will be a replay of the presentation if you'd like to listen to it. We'll also provide the slides for you via Allison's website. So I think that just about does it. We're coming up on an hour here. So a final thank you. Thank you, Allison. Thank you for everyone in our audience.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks to everybody.
Yeah, we hope this was helpful. Keep in touch.